and welcome to the Best in Performance. This is an interview series where we sit down with veterans and thought leaders in the web performance space and learn about the experiences they've had, the lessons they've learned, things they know now that they wish they had known, and their thoughts on where things are going. This series is brought to you by Rigor. Rigor offers cloud-based web performance solutions designed to help teams find, fix, and prevent the speed and UX issues that are impacting their sites and apps. We monitor real browser user experiences, multi-step API flows, and even benchmark competitors, so you can get fast and stay fast and integrate into your development process. I'm Billy Hoffman, the CTO of Rigor, and with me today is Cliff Crocker. Cliff has had an interesting career in web performance. He's worked both for vendors like Keynote and Sosta, and also been a customer working at e-com giants like Walmart. Cliff is currently the Senior Line Director of Web Performance at Akamai. Cliff, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Awesome to see you.
Awesome. Well, I thought a good place to start would be talk to me about how you got into web performance originally.
Yeah, so more years ago than I like to admit, I got into web performance really right out of college. So, was working basically as a sysadmin for Agilent Technologies, which was a spinoff of HP years ago. Was handling the administration of middleware layer, web servers, and started to really look at how we benchmarked ourselves and how our performance was, but more importantly, how we would scale. So I spent a lot of time load and performance testing, measuring with tools like Keynote, SiteScope, and those types of tools back in the day, and really kind of took to it and really caught the bug of wanting to do more performance optimization and make things faster. So that was my first taste into it. Once I actually left Agilent, my next step was actually to go to Keynote. I went to them. It's like, look, I love your tools. I love what you're doing. I'd love to learn more. And at that time, I came in and started doing load and performance consulting for Keynote. We were testing a lot of the large retailers out there, a lot of the financial services institutions, to perform these actual very large load tests that we had run against the site, and essentially, make sure that they could scale to handle whatever their peak events were. I met an interesting fellow at Keynote, Ben Rushlow, good friend and mentor at the time, who was trying to get his practice off the ground with this idea of front-end web performance and taking all that operational data that Keynote provided and starting to turn that into insights for customers. Because at the time, they were looking at this more as a tactical, is the site up, down, hair on fire, or how do we actually fix this problem, versus the strategic nature of what can we do to actually make our site faster, and what is this whole thing around front-end web performance that was coming out that people like Steve Souders and others were championing at the time.
That's kind of interesting that there's this shift from using performance tools as sort of either in a load testing capacity of like, how much weight can this bridge take, or in sort of an alerting capacity of like, oh God, like the bridge is failing. But it sounds like when you sort of made this shift over onto the consulting side and thinking about the front end, it was more about how do we use this data proactively to get faster as opposed to just like fighting fires.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. People were investing in these tools and using them and really kind of opening the door to them around, hey, there's a lot more here, rather than sort of having this fix the problem, linear cycle. How do you fix it once and then optimize and get faster and faster and faster? So these aren't the, alerting type issues where something's down or extremely poor performing for a period of time. It's the incremental changes and fixes that have huge impacts on the user experience. So even back then, that's what we were trying to think about and focus on was let's actually change that dynamic a little bit. Certainly the operational aspects are still there and are there today, and we see them. What I think I'm finding is that as we've evolved these tools in the space a lot more, they tend to kind of have a dual role where you do have a strategic nature for the tool, and you have to think about, how do you make incremental changes to the user experience to make it better? No different than people do for just typical conversion rate optimization, along with how do we use this tool to make sure that we're operating efficiently and basically dealing with mean time to resolution being as small as possible.
Yeah, and you're starting to hit on something that I think is really interesting, which is when you shift, like in its traditional role as something that was used to, you mentioned like mean time to result, right? an IT organization is never not going to monitor its properties. It would be negligent if it didn't, because you need to know, be like not having smoke alarms. That's just silly. So you need to know when there's a problem, and a lot of times IT teams are sort of, judged as a KPI on uptime and availability. How quickly are they able to resolve these things? And so you don't really need to make too much of there's not much of a business case around should you need this tool and what are the capabilities. But when you move to like the proactive, like, hey, there are things we can do to make our site faster. Now you're sort of competing for work as part of the app being created and updated. And there are a lot of demands on those times, right? Like fixing bugs, implementing new features, supporting a new business initiative or marketing campaign. And so how do you have to change sort of the language of how you talk about performance to be able to not get, to essentially fit into with those other initiatives and get prioritized?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It actually does kind of illustrate the next trajectory in my career, which was doing exactly that, doing all this consulting and finding all these opportunities for people to focus on was really my job at Keynote in the consulting arm, working with Ben and growing that business. So there was no shortage of problems. There was no shortage of things that we found, ranging from, hey, maybe you should enable persistent connections, to more higher level optimizing your JavaScript and at the time following the famous rules of Steve Satters to make sure that they were following best practices. But bringing all the information to the table, to your point, these organizations, they had huge backlogs of other things that were being prioritized for them from the business. And really, I think that's kind of the challenge and the challenge you highlight. How do you compete for that time? I switched and left Keynote to actually try to solve this problem and jump the fence and go to the other side and figure out just why it was so hard to implement these top 10 things I was telling people every month and month and month and month in the same list. What's making that so hard to implement? I joined the team at Walmart, at the time Walmart Global E-commerce, and started working with all of their brands, .com, Sam's Club, Walmart Canada, Mexico, Asda in the UK. And I was chartered with performance and reliability at Walmart. Help build this up. You're not only responsible for making sure we can test and scale the site, but this other thing you want to do that we're not really sure how to do, we want you to own and run with. And that was the challenge that I had there. So firsthand, front lines, saw the fact that, yeah, we've got a lot of problems. First off, we need to implement a RUM solution. And at the time, no one knew what RUM was. Boomerang had just been open sourced, I think, in 2010 when I joined. But we wanted it. We wanted to get that real user impact and start to identify those areas where, it might be that we looked okay at the median, but at the 95th percentile, we were horrific. So had no problems getting the tag out on the site, had no problems getting the data back that showed where we had performance issues. But even then, scaring people with the 95th percentile wasn't helping us move the needle, wasn't getting us prioritized because the engineering team simply had all this other stuff to do. Right. So really, long answer to your question, what we had to do is we had to actually discuss it in a way that mattered to the business. And all those things that were prioritized in the backlog had a predicted or an expected impact on revenue. So at the time, what we did, and this was actually interesting because it wasn't an engineering-led initiative. It was a colleague that I knew on the site merchandising side at Walmart who was very interested in looking at other things we could do around performance after reading things like the Amazon study, which were very popular at that time, where we sort of teamed up and said, hey, I've got all this RUM data. You've got all this conversion data, kind of like the Reese's peanut butter cups of web performance. Like, let's come together and do this study. And we did. We did a correlation analysis to show what impact performance, and for us, it was the front-end time, essentially page load time, had on conversion rates and had on revenue. So once we married that data, we did a study. We sort of asked for forgiveness and went out and talked about it at a WebPerf meetup, and got a lot of great feedback from the community, but also internally at Akamai, where this changed the discussion. It's like, well, wait a minute, this does have an impact on revenue. people are going to go elsewhere to shop, even if we are the low cost leader. We've got to really prioritize this stuff, and we actually have to start making a difference. So all of a sudden, we started getting prioritized in that roadmap because we could demonstrate revenue impact, because we could demonstrate improved user experience, and we could demonstrate not only like where choices were being made that were bad, but also where choices were being made that were good. Because it wasn't always faster is better, as like we always like to say. There were things and trade-offs where, yes, we can monetize the site through X, Y, and Z, and it's worth it to us, even though we know that there's all these other performance things that we need to work on to keep the page fast. So it started that language or that dialogue, I guess, between the business and engineering. And I think that really started to shift and create the performance culture that Walmart had at the time, and I believe still carries today, with some great people and engineers working over there.
I love that, because there's so much I want to unpack from that. I mean, the first thing I'm hearing is that the importance of getting that performance data aligned with business metrics as quickly as possible, because otherwise you're just shouting in the wind, we're at 3 seconds, we're at 3 seconds. And like, maybe if you could give a frame of like, and our competitor is, 2 seconds, that might make them listen to you. But being able to say, hey, we're at 3 seconds, and here's how it's impacting us from a business perspective, that's going to turn some heads. You mentioned you happen to know this person over on sort of the businessy side. How have you seen the people who collect the data or who are passionate about performance find those corresponding business people? Because often they're over in an analytics silo, or they're in a different part. They're not usually inside the engineering org or even the IT org. So how have you seen people successfully been able to like get to those people and do these sorts of pilot programs?
Yeah, I've seen, and there are a thousand great stories out there of people who have built a performance culture, and really kind of made headlines about this that are much bigger than my story. WPO Stats is a great source to go to if you want to learn more about people who've created business cases around performance. But what I've seen that works is lots of things that have worked, but being creative about how you actually pull people in. One of the things we did was we kind of stole a bunch of monitors from the NOC after we moved buildings and started putting them up all around the building, and started throwing up RUM data and performance stats there to engage people who weren't used to looking at that data. So you've got a marketing department on a floor, and they've got this dashboard of performance and users, and they start asking questions, and they start pointing at it, and they start coming to our group around, well, what does this really mean? And what is this impact analysis that you're seeing? I've seen people very successful with that. Lunch and learns, people, saying, okay, well, we're going to go and talk about performance, and giving you an understanding or a one-on-one on what WebPerf is at a company or things of that nature. That's one way that I've seen engage. But one other thing that I've seen evolve over the years, and I credit our awesome community for this, is the fact that it's now becoming a mainstream topic, finally, in the user experience world, where people get that performance is user experience. People get that you can't work with a static mock-up or design or prototype. You have to actually see it in HTML, understand how it renders, because that's all part of the performance experience. That blending of performance and design, I think that you're starting to see, starts to bridge that gap quite well as well. So anyway, I think there's a lot of things in there to potentially dig around in and look. But what I always encourage people to is to reach out and understand the perspective of the person that you want to engage. In my case, it was speaking the language of conversion rate and revenue and orders per minute and things like that did resonate on the other side of the business, and then translating those to, well, how does performance impact those? How do you actually make that correlation?
Got it. That's super helpful. I love sort of your guerrilla tactics. I picture a younger Cliff, all dressed in black like a ninja, setting up flat panels around the office that people come in the next day and they're like, what's this dashboard?
It was great, and there was a lot of those guerrilla tactics, and fortunately we had the support of a great team at Walmart Labs that sort of helped support that. At one time, running around with the smiley Walmart faces around with our Nerf guns and everything else, pulling some of these same tactics. So yeah, not quite an illegal activity, but certainly borderline.
Now, So I love the sort of the informal nature. Everybody always loves a free lunch, and then being able, hopefully there's going to be one marketing or business person who in between bites of the sandwich is like, wait, what? You said we're getting bounce rates, and you catch them and you got them. But you also, the people that are sort of like planning and scheduling the work, depending on who you're talking to in the engineering organization, whether it's a team lead, a director, or even on the product management side, depending on their KPIs or where they are in the organization, they may not be incentivized about I'm trying to improve I'm trying to make shopping cart abandonment better, or I'm trying to increase order size. You get those business metrics about the impact of performance on the business's bottom line. How do you find the right people on the other side to actually get it scheduled?
Yeah. So I think in the case of many teams, I think this is true, but product owners and product owners that actually own the backlog and groom the backlog, bringing this to them, they have the same goals in mind in terms of the needs of the business. So making sure that they're bought in and they understand the challenges. But more important than that, I think where you really make sure that you get this embedded into your process is by instituting things like performance budgets. So, won't take credit for that. Tim Cadlick's the man around performance budgets, but man, that has been such a powerful and simple thing where you put a performance budget in place and a developer knows that budget and they can work within that budget. They can say, okay, I'm going to exceed my allowable JavaScript requests on this page, so something else has to give. Or, when we're looking at our RUM data, we can see that when we push this out or trickled out a canary build, it was actually a lot worse performing, so we have to roll back those changes. So giving them tools like that they can institute into the process that they can benchmark against, because without them, they're just doing their jobs and they're just getting their code out there and they're just getting these features implemented. Until you actually give them what I feel are really more requirements around the features that they're building, then really there's not a whole lot that you can hold them accountable for. So performance as a requirement, I think, is one of the things that I've also seen work extremely well. And we actually do that at Akamai as well. When we're writing my team, when they're building a PRD for a new product or a new feature, there's in the PRD, a required area where we talk about expectations around performance. Can't add more than X milliseconds of latency to start render or whatever it might be. So I think this idea of setting performance budgets, I think the idea of instituting actual performance requirements in that product and feature process and development process is a way that they're actually able to then take that data back and make sure that they're actually living it. Because as we know with performance, it's not always that incremental change where all of a sudden you're 3 seconds slower one day. It's the creep and the bleed that you see over a long period of time. So.
Yeah, and let's kind of talk about this a little bit, because I think it applies not only for your own content, but also third parties, right? Marketing deploys a new tag on the site and suddenly performance goes wonky. That happens, but it's sort of that slow boiling the frog kind of thing where it's a little tag, it's a little thing here and there, and then suddenly you look up. Performance is a lot worse. The fastest site on the internet, right, is example.com, because it's no external files. It's fast. It fits in one TCP/IP packet. It's super there, but functionality is minimal. So when people are filling out those specs, like you mentioned, what was the acronym you said in the spec?
PRD, product requirements document. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so in that product requirements doc, when you're filling in the performance section, you're saying it can't get faster or slower. I mean, if you're adding significant functionality, you could make start render, you could make some of these metrics change. How do you sort of balance look, if this metric does change, you need to provide this value. And sort of the third-party marketing side of it is hey, you're adding this thing to our site. It's going to maybe change visually complete or speed index or maybe time to interactive, but it's got to have this corresponding increase in the business. How do you sort of balance allowing those budgets to maybe grow a little bit as long as the net win to the business is okay?
Yeah, well, I think you're hitting on it. It's the fact that, hey, if we're adding this additional functionality, because expectations of users today are so incredibly high in terms of not just performance, but also what their experience they're going to be getting. And they expect to have this intelligence and this experience on the site that helps kind of guide them through their journey, making recommendations about what they should buy next. I mean, we're kind of, driven by those behaviors as when we interact with these brands and these sites. So I think it's really weighing what impact is this having and how is that measured? So if I'm adding a new third-party tag to the site, one, is it something that's actually a visual element or something that's improving that actual experience? And if so, let's measure and see the impact. And I think that's why for years we've seen A/B testing and split testing, experimentation, now becoming such a thing. And this is where I think engineering is starting to learn quite a bit more from our marketing and business brothers and sisters who've been focused on this idea of split testing and testing out these theories. So if you were to implement a new feature, running that through an A/B test campaign to see, okay, well, what was the impact? Well, we need to look at that from both performance and from the business metric. But if we see performance slow down slightly, but engagement was way up, and oh my gosh, we had like all these people interacting with this photo gallery on the site, then you might make that decision and that trade-off, because ultimately it does come down to what's the end goal of a business, and commerce or financial services or whoever it is tends to center around that user experience and the customer impact. The other thing to learn from that, though, is it's not always all or none. There's compromises to be made. At my previous employer, when we were looking at our 95th percentile and scaring the pants off of everybody, if you ever really want to get attention of someone, show them their 95th percentile on their product details page and see what happens. But once we sort of uncover that beast and we started looking into things, there were galleries and photo images and men and women showing watches and jewelry on all these different pages of their site, but the images themselves were extremely high resolution. They weren't compressed in any way. They were virtually print quality images. So that doesn't have to happen. You can still have that experience and have an optimized image on your site and deliver that same experience and engagement while still keeping performance top of mind. So
I think there's, yes, I absolutely agree. I think a lot of the problems we see with websites today, I mean, certainly you're going to have the backhoe through the fiber, the joke that like, oh, the site's down because it's random backhoe through the fiber. And certainly sometimes there's just random outages and issues. I mean, you go look at like Sodexis or somebody who puts out reports like that, but a lot of times these are self-inflicted, right? Your marketing added one tag too many. The creative team put out those high quality print level images instead of the optimized ones. How do you suggest organizations start to like try to put procedures or best practices? Like if somebody like hears this and they're like, holy crap, Billy and Cliff are pretty smart and they're right, like we have to start caring about performance, but like where would I even begin? How would you sort of suggest someone take stock and then begin forming and executing a performance improvement plan?
gosh, it's a really good question, because I don't know that there's a set methodology for everybody. I mean, of course, I could feed you one and tell you, but I've seen it vary so much from time to time. It may be, and honestly, where I like to start in organizations is who's actually writing the check for these vendors, right? Who's actually writing the check for these third parties, and going to them first, and then saying, look, you really need to incorporate an SLA with this third party. And okay, well, third parties don't usually do these SLAs. How do you actually measure it? And you can get all that with great RUM data. Like there's awesome tools out there, which I won't plug, that help you get this information and can help you enforce and set SLAs with these different vendors. So starting there, even when you're in contracts with these third parties or looking at this software, I think it's a great place to start, and no better place to start. And then starting to talk about and obviously do what we did, which was quantify it. If you can't quantify it, if you don't bring data, you can't have a conversation with somebody about, that's completely subjective. So, we tell people this, I know you tell people this all the time, you don't start optimizing before you've actually put measurement in place. Like it's performance malpractice to do so. Like you just can't do it. So that might sound horrible coming from somebody that works at a CDN who says, yeah, just turn this on and it's faster. But my advice to customers is, I want to show you that I'm faster. So before you turn this on, make sure you're measuring it. Use the plethora of tools that are out there to make sure you're establishing that baseline. So I think it does start with that. Starting at the source. Who are we signing up with? What are we actually holding them accountable for, and setting those expectations? And then just making sure you've got good, solid measurement in place and a way to quantify that impact with the business results that you're seeing. I think that's a good way to start, and start slow. And then it might differ for different organizations. It might be that you have separate product teams for each individual page, and you need to go about working with those product teams differently. Or you might have somebody that's running the entire site, or the site might be completely outsourced. So working with the number of customers and situations that I've worked with, I know that there's not always a one size fits all, but it all really does kind of start from that same place.
That's actually a perfect transition to what I wanted to kind of talk about next, which was, we've talked about the importance of getting the business data aligned with the performance data, how to make the business case. These are all things that vendors like us would tell you to do, and consultants, when they're paid to come in and give you that, nice ginormous PDF to justify the cost, will give you. I'm super interested in how you went from vendor to customer, and then also to vendor. So there's certainly things we have on our side. I'm wondering, how did you sort of operationalize this? When you actually were the customer, you had those lists, how did you fight to get those things prioritized? How did you champion your successes when there were successes? When was there maybe an initiative that you guys tried that failed, and why? Because I'm thinking about the people who are going to be watching this, how we help them in their day-to-day, because they're going to hear all our stuff and say, heck yeah, I want to do that right now.
Yeah.
Tell me some of the stories of how you did it.
Yeah, I think that first off, there's a lot of stories. So trying to handpick one's hard. I think you hit on something though that I'm glad you did, because I actually had a note to make sure that I did mention it, because the thing you cannot undervalue is celebrating the success. Yeah. So the worst thing you can do, not the worst thing, but it would be really bad if you went out there and said, hey, we want to improve our 95th percentile by 5 seconds. The dev team does it, and you don't trumpet that win. I mean, I'm talking over the moon trumpeted, like beers on a Friday afternoon, sending out, photos and awards. Etsy did this, and they have an amazing performance culture over there, where they would celebrate and give out these performance team awards from the performance team when someone would make something faster, and just really kind of celebrate that success. So I'm glad that you hit on that part, because I don't want to undervalue that. But I think it's just as important in each one of these engagements where you're trying to move the needle, to not give up when you fail. So you fail, like, okay, well, what did we learn from that? All right, well, we tried something new, and we, an example of one time where we failed was we pushed extremely hard a customer pushed extremely hard on search results. Search results was one of the worst performers. Bunch of images coming up. They're trying to get as many results onto the page as they could. I think there was something like 25 or 30 different results that they were showing on the page. And as a result, like all those images, even though they were somewhat optimized, there was a lot of logic on the page. It was really slow and poor performing. So we're like, okay, well, let's cut that down to 5. Like, we can see the incremental gain. So we did. And then engagement after the search results page just plummeted, like horribly, right? So like, okay, well, what did we do wrong, right? Maybe it was taking too big of a swing. Maybe it was realizing that, again, faster isn't always going to be better, and you do need to kind of, step that up incrementally. So there's absolutely learnings that you take from that. I think the key is the sort of blameless postmortem that you do around what worked, what didn't work, and taking time to kind of celebrate those wins, and being okay if you don't hit everyone out of the park, because it makes the wins more rememberable, I guess.
And I'm fascinated by this sort of fostering the performance culture, because when I talk to people about performance, often there's one or two sort of passionate people. Maybe they're frontline engineers, they're developers, maybe it's a product person or somebody in IT. It's like one person can't doesn't an army make, right? Like you need backup. You need more people. At the very least, you got to coordinate people. You can't just go randomly flipping on like far future caching without like coordinating with somebody. You're going to jack the CDN all up. So like you need more people, and I'm super interested in sort of like how you foster that culture. When you got to Walmart, what was the performance culture like, and what are some things that you did to sort of grow and bring people to that side?
Yeah. So when I got there, there was wicked smart people that were focused primarily on scaling what is a huge site today, and that was where the focus around performance was. When you would say performance to anyone at that time, whether it was Walmart or anyone that was in the top IR 500 or whatever it was, performance meant don't go down at holiday. Performance meant all of our revenue is over this weekend, like don't F it up. Like that was performance, and that was where people's focus was, rightfully so, because I know you've probably heard the horror stories of companies who lost millions and millions because they went down or weren't able to scale, and we see it every day. So that was where the conversation started, and that's where they were. I think when I got there, even though they knew this other thing that we've been talking to them about as a consultant and everything else, they didn't necessarily have the focus there, because the engineering teams were focused on let's go take on Amazon. So nice challenge there, right? So I think that's kind of where it started. But then it became hey, now that we have this team with this charter, be visible. Like that was the biggest thing, was be visible, create these stories, create these case studies, bring data, but socialize it and make it something that everybody can understand. Whether it's stealing monitors and spreading them throughout the building, which we talked about, or it's sending out reports and doing competitive analysis with web page tests, which we were doing at the time, and because there weren't a lot of tools at our disposal to do it. In stack ranking us against our competitors, but also stack ranking us against ourselves. Getting that kind of data and those kind of sound bites out there just start to generate a buzz and an interest, and I think that gets others involved in how we're going to get better. So, I do practice the whole ask for forgiveness, and I unabashedly send these types of things out even today. But it's received very well. It's received in the nature it's intended, I guess I would say. If it's to shame someone, that's never going to work, and it's not a collaborative way to do things. And those were mistakes we made as well. Shaming people just doesn't work, and you can't call somebody's baby ugly without giving them some advice about how to make it pretty. Like it just doesn't work that well. But yeah, I think that was sort of how we started to sort of socialize it. Not everybody in the organization needed to be able to define what time to first byte stood for, or the TTFB rather. And what was important though was just understanding that red was bad, green was good when we were showing them a time series chart with a performance budget, or a red dot on a globe versus a green dot on a globe is good. I mean, simplifying it to that level.
You really touched on something there that I think is super important, is that you can't, a lot of times performance can be about saying no, right? My background is in security, and actually we were sort of called you're not allowed to do that, like bad developer, like smack with newspaper, which is never good. Like your job inside the organization is not to tell people no. Your job in the organization on the performance side is to tell people yes, but here's how to do that in a way that is going to be optimal. Sort of the flip side of performance is efficiency in many ways. And so it's like, hey, let's talk. You want to add a new image carousel. You want to add, videos on your product description page. Awesome. We're here not to tell you no. We're here to tell you how to make that happen in a way that's performant, and then let's do it in the best way we can, but then let's use data to make sure that it's actually having the intended effect. Because it's not about putting a video on the product description page. It's about making that product description page better for the business. And I find that when performance people can not be negative and not be calling people's babies ugly or talking about how marketing messed it up, but be more about here's how we can take that collateral and make it great, and take that vision or experience you want to have, and performance is an aspect of that, and let's optimize it and deliver it, you get a lot more receptiveness than being the one person on the conference call that's saying, well, let me tell you why you can't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, performance is user experience, and the more you kind of relate that to what that's what we're all in it for. We want a great, engaging user experience. Like nobody wants to work at a site that has a example.com page. Like that's not fun. Like
Yeah.
it's not engaging, right? Like you want to have this great experience. You just want performance to be part of that great experience, and I think that's part of the mind shift. The other thing I would say that I think is also important, and this is me putting my product management hat on, and something I've learned, since going vendor customer back to vendor, is it really does not matter what my opinion is, and it just really doesn't. And it's the whole pragmatic marketing mantra that people talk about of your opinion, however great, is irrelevant. And that was something that I had to learn, because I had a lot of great opinions. Like they were good ideas, and you need to listen to me and institute this because I said it's a great opinion. It's kind of BS. Like what matters is the customer and that voice of the customer. And I think when you take that, and I do this today with the engineering partners that I have today, I like to think they respect me and think I have great ideas, but they don't pay attention to them at all until I attach a customer to it or a customer story to it. So if I'm there and I'm trying to make this experience better, put yourself in the seat of the customer and force others to, that's very disarming. And it's very, you can't argue with that data point. You can't go and beat an engineer over the head with your own opinion. But if you go there and you say, hey, look at look what's happened to our abandonment rates since we rolled out this new version of XYZ that got so much slower. They don't deny that, and they care about that too, and they all care about the user experience. So again, I think customer first, or, whoever that might be for the site that you're building, I think is the right approach.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to like plug companies, but actually customer first is one of Rigor's core values. And I found, being a product guy like you, nothing sort of reframes a conversation as like, that's great, you think this, or that's great, you think this. Let's actually see what that would be like for the customer. This is that, like, these decisions have this impact on the customer's experience, and not just like an opinion. I have data, and data trumps, regardless of how smart you and I are or what our opinion is, the fact that like we made this change and bounce rate went up. Like this is not a good experience. This is not actually helping the customers. We might be really wedded to personally whatever improvement got made, but if it's not if it hurt the customer and then it hurt the business metrics, really doesn't matter whose idea it was.
Yeah, 100%. And there's just no replacement for it. And it could be a metric, but also it's that personal experience where engineering needs to be in front of customers, and engineering needs to go there. And I don't want to get into like product shop talk here, but as we're building these tools for our customers, just like our customers are building their sites for theirs, there is no replacement for that personal connection that someone can get if they walk into customer X and they talk to this person that's using and watching and observing how that person's using their product and going, oh my God, like he's having to search around for this thing that we hid because we didn't think it was important anymore. Like that's horrible, right? Even though product management might have been talking about that for months, all of a sudden witnessing it in the real world, it makes all the difference. And same is true of web experience and performance, where you can actually watch users load a site and see a blank screen and navigate to another tab. And it's like, well, wait a minute, go back to my site. It's almost there. It's great. I promise. Like, it just doesn't matter, right?
Yes. That's awesome. Cliff, I want to kind of wrap up with two questions for you. My first one is, you have the DeLorean. You could go back in time, probably more years than you would like, to early young Cliff at those first at joining Keynote and doing the consulting, and you can tell him like the things that you've learned, like what are the things that you've learned in your career, the lessons that you so wish you could go back and tell yourself just starting out that would have saved you a lot of sort of pain and heartache?
Gosh, yeah, it's a great one. Like, part of me wants to give you the cliche answer of I wouldn't change a thing. Like, it's been such a great ride.
And Amazon and Apple stuff.
And it certainly has, and I'm thankful for all of it, and more importantly, like what I learned from all the mistakes that I've made. But trying to take the question more seriously, to give you an earnest answer, I think a lot of it is just, back then, learning more quickly that there's always sort of two sides to a story. Learning quickly that, hey, a engineering view versus a line of business view, understanding both sides is where you kind of get success. So not being so focused early on about beating this drum of performance on deaf ears without understanding the other side of the problem. So empathy is extremely important in our work, and I don't think there's any replacement for it. Other things, not to quote people, but from our velocity culture of yesteryear, I remember something that resonated with me and actually forced me into a lot of the decisions that I made, from Jesse Robbins, who was one of the original guys who started Velocity with Steve Souders. Had a quote and had an awesome talk, and find it on YouTube because it's an inspiring talk about don't fight stupid, make more awesome. And if I were to go back years and years, I would say sometimes I spent a lot of time fighting stupid, and it exhausted me, and I made no progress. And I didn't, cut bait and go. And I'm not saying leaving companies, I'm saying projects, I'm saying things that I worked on soon enough. There's not enough time in this life to invest in things that are a dead end. And I think the sooner you can sort of, adjust course, the better. And it helped me a lot as I learned that later. And it helps me now when sometimes I'm fighting an idea or fighting a proposal or fighting this direction that we're going, where I need to just kind of stop and say, I don't need to do this. Like, I can go this other route. So I think that's probably maybe enough pontification about my DeLorean, but yeah.
Don't fight stupid, make more awesome.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better way to end our interview today. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks for having me. Always great to chat with you.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much for joining us today, Cliff. For all of you out there, this is one of many exciting episodes we have queued up for this season of The Best in Performance. We hope you found this as valuable and enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it. If you'd like to follow along with our future episodes, you can check out rigor.com and see more episodes as they're published. We'll see you next time, and until then, get fast, stay fast. Thank you.